In 1972, Jenkins debuted his Chevrolet Vega Pro Stock, a small, lightweight car that destroyed the competition.
The year was 1972. While America's muscle car enthusiasts were clinging to big blocks and worshipping Hemis behind the closed doors of a Pennsylvania garage, a grumpy engineer was working on something that would shatter everything drag racing thought it knew, a lightweight small displacement weapon that would make every muscle car on the strip look obsolete. And NH officials tried to stop him before it even ran. This is the shocking truth behind Bill Jenkins' deadly 1972 Chevy Vega. The early 1970s were a golden but ruthless time for drag racing in America. It was the age of roaring engines, burning rubber, and men chasing fractions of a second to prove who ruled the strip. The National Hot Rod Association, known to racers as the NHRA, had become the ultimate authority in the world of professional drag racing. But even legends have their flaws, and behind all the glory, there was a system built to favor the giants. In those years, almost every winning car carried one thing in common: a huge engine block. Bigger engines meant more power, and more power meant more trophies. The rulebook supported this mindset. The NHRA had created a weight brake system that gave big engines an advantage. In theory, it was supposed to balance performance between different engine sizes, but in practice, it only made the strong stronger. If you had a big block engine, you were safe. If you were running something smaller, you were almost invisible. The crowd loved the heavy hitters. Names like Hemi and Cobra Jet were shouted like war cries across racetracks. The Chrysler teams with their 426 cubic inch Hemi engines were dominating the scene, crushing anything that dared to challenge them. General Motors and Ford were also deep in the same arms race, throwing massive engines into their muscle cars just to keep up. It was not about skill anymore, it was about who could afford more cubic inches. But while most racers were obsessed with brute strength, one man quietly began to think differently. His name was Bill Jenkins, a man known across the pits as Grumpy. The nickname came from his serious face and no-nonsense attitude, but behind that gruff look was a mind sharper than any wrench in his toolbox. Jenkins was an engineer before he was a racer. He saw patterns, calculations, and possibilities others ignored. While others worshipped raw power, Jenkins believed in efficiency, that brains could beat brawn. He had been part of the drag racing world for years, helping General Motors and tuning engines that broke records. But by 1972, he was growing frustrated. The NHRA's rules had made innovation almost impossible. They wanted competition, but their system only rewarded conformity. Jenkins didn't want to play by their game anymore. He wanted to rewrite it. In his small garage in Malvern, Pennsylvania, he began to dream of a car that could break the system without breaking the rules. Something that could outthink the giants using engineering, not muscle. To the outside world, he was just another racer tinkering with parts, but to those who really knew him, Jenkins was planning something revolutionary. He watched how others wasted money building bigger and louder engines, trying to squeeze a few more miles per hour out of old designs. Jenkins saw the weakness in that logic. More power meant more weight, more fuel, and less control. What if, instead of building a car that fought physics, he could build one that worked with it? What if a smaller engine could be tuned so perfectly that it could destroy cars twice its size? That idea became an obsession. Jenkins started calculating how to make a smaller engine breathe like a big one. He studied airflow, compression, and gearing ratios. Every night, he filled notebooks with equations that made no sense to anyone but him. The car he had in mind was not going to be another muscle car. It was going to be something the drag strip had never seen before. A lightweight, small displacement machine built with surgical precision. But there was a problem. The NHRA's weight rules made it nearly impossible for such a car to compete fairly. The association believed bigger engines should carry more weight and smaller ones less, but the math was broken. It protected the big names, the Hemis, the big block Chevys, and the boss engines. Jenkins understood that if he wanted to win, he couldn't just play by their book, he would have to find a way around it. That meant bending the limits, pushing the gray areas of the rulebook to the breaking point. And if he succeeded, his car would not just win races, it would expose the flaws of the entire system. The stakes were bigger than trophies. This was about proving that innovation could defeat tradition. As the sound of roaring Hemis filled racetracks across America, Jenkins stayed quiet in his Pennsylvania garage. No one knew what he was building or how far he was willing to go to prove his point. The few who visited his shop saw parts scattered everywhere, tools left in strange places, and a covered car body sitting in the corner. Something was happening in that small shop, something powerful, something dangerous, something that could change drag racing forever. But what he was building inside his small Pennsylvania shop was something no one was supposed to see, not even the National Hot Rod Association. Inside a quiet garage in Malvern, Pennsylvania, Bill Jenkins was building something no one else could imagine. The world of drag racing was obsessed with muscle and money, but Jenkins was planning a rebellion. His idea was simple. If he could not beat the National Hot Rod Association's big block monsters with power, he would outsmart them with precision. His weapon of choice was unexpected, a Chevrolet Vega. It was light, cheap, and laughed at by every racer who saw it. But that was the point. It was the perfect disguise. Under its fragile skin, Jenkins planned to hide a car that would make every giant look slow. He stripped the Vega down to bare metal. Every factory part that slowed it down was replaced with something smarter, lighter, faster. The biggest secret was the chassis, a hidden tubular steel frame built by hand and welded to fit perfectly beneath the Vega's thin body panels. It looked stock from the outside, but it was a pure racing skeleton underneath. Jenkins had turned an economy car into a weapon. Only a handful of trusted builders were allowed to see it. They worked at night, covering the car whenever visitors stopped by. Neighbors heard clanging metal and the sharp hiss of welding torches until dawn. To everyone else, it was just Grumpy tinkering in his shop again. But in truth, a revolution was taking shape. The engine was another masterpiece. A 331 cubic inch small block, carved from a reworked 327, tuned with the precision of a scientist. It spun to 9,000 revolutions per minute, far beyond what anyone thought possible. Where others relied on raw torque, Jenkins relied on balance and airflow. He didn't chase brute strength, he chased perfection. Every component was designed with purpose. The aluminum connecting rods, the forged pistons, the compression ratio of 13:1, each element fine-tuned for speed. Yet outwardly, everything still looked factory. Jenkins had studied the National Hot Rod Association rulebook word for word, twisting its gray areas into advantages. If the rules said parts must appear stock, then he made them look stock, even if they weren't. When the car finally sat on its wheels, it looked harmless. A dull green Vega, the kind of car your neighbor might drive to the grocery store. But behind that disguise hid a monster. The team called it Grumpy's toy. Jenkins called it something else. Proof. Proof that intelligence could crush arrogance. When a journalist once asked him if his car was legal, Jenkins smirked and said, "We didn't build it to be legal, we built it to win." That one line said everything. His Vega wasn't cheating, it was evolution. A machine so far ahead of its time that even the rulebook couldn't keep up. To the National Hot Rod Association, it was suspicious. To Jenkins, it was genius. By early 1972, the car was ready. Covered by a tarp, hidden on its trailer, it began its quiet journey toward Pomona. No one outside his team had seen it run, but rumors spread like wildfire. A small car was coming to challenge the giants, and no one, not even the National Hot Rod Association, was prepared for what was about to happen. The moment Bill Jenkins rolled his Chevrolet Vega out of the Malvern shop, he knew he had built something far beyond anything the National Hot Rod Association had ever imagined. To the naked eye, it looked like an average car, but beneath its unassuming body panels lay a monster, a hand-built piece of engineering that laughed in the face of physics and regulations alike. What Jenkins created was not just a fast car, it was a challenge to an entire system. At the center of this machine was the engine, a 331 cubic inch small block Chevrolet, born from a simple idea that precision could defeat power. While other teams poured money into 426 cubic inch Hemi engines or massive Ford and Chrysler power plants, Jenkins went smaller but smarter. He re-engineered a 327 block, bored it out, and crafted a perfect balance of stroke and compression. The result was an engine that could breathe deeper, rev higher, and produce power numbers no one thought possible from such a small displacement. Most professional drag engines of the time struggled to survive beyond 6,500 revolutions per minute. Jenkins' 331 screamed past 9,000 revolutions per minute without breaking a sweat. Its compression ratio of 13:1 made it brutal, explosive, and alive. Where big blocks relied on sheer torque, this engine relied on speed and timing, a symphony of combustion perfectly tuned to milliseconds. The numbers did not lie. What started as a humble economy car engine now produced over 580 horsepower, nearly double its original output. But horsepower was only part of the secret. The real innovation was how Jenkins used the National Hot Rod Association's own rules against them. He studied every page of the rulebook until he knew it better than the officials themselves. The regulations said that cars must retain stock body dimensions and factory-style chassis components. Jenkins interpreted those phrases literally and twisted them beautifully. His car technically had a Vega body, but the frame underneath was custom-built tubular steel, shaped to fit perfectly within the body shell. To the officials, it looked legal. In reality, it was a race car wearing a costume. Even the suspension was a masterstroke. Jenkins replaced the heavy factory components with a lightweight 3-link rear setup and a modified front end designed for maximum grip. The National Hot Rod Association's inspectors saw nothing unusual because every part was cleverly disguised to appear original. It was, as many later described, a lie written in plain sight. Word of the mysterious Vega began to spread through the racing community. Competitors who saw it up close gave it nicknames like Grumpy's Cheat and Tube Frame Fraud. Some laughed, others protested, but everyone knew one thing: this car was fast. It launched harder, accelerated quicker, and handled smoother than anything else on the track. Jenkins' rivals with their massive engines found themselves humiliated by a car half their size. When Jenkins finally took the Vega to the drag strip, the results were shocking. While other cars were still spinning their tires halfway down the lane, the Vega was already across the finish line. Its best recorded times reached 9.6 seconds at over 145 miles per hour, performance levels unheard of for a car running such a small engine. The Vega was not just beating the Hemis, it was rewriting what drag racing thought was possible. The engineering inside the engine was just as revolutionary. Jenkins used forged pistons with special dome designs, aluminum connecting rods that were replaced every 50 runs, and exhaust headers that exited through the fenders for maximum flow. Every element was optimized for one thing: efficiency at extreme revolutions per minute. Even the smallest details, like the angle of the spark plugs and the shape of the combustion chamber, were tuned through endless trial and error. When other racers asked how he achieved it, Jenkins would simply shrug and say, "It's just good math." But the truth was far deeper. It was obsession. He spent countless nights perfecting every tolerance, every surface, every gasket. He once said that building a perfect race car was like writing music. One wrong note, and the whole thing falls apart. The National Hot Rod Association did not know how to react. They could not officially ban the Vega, because by the letter of the rulebook, it was still legal. But everyone knew it broke the spirit of the rules completely. It had exposed how outdated their standards had become. For the first time, drag racing faced a car that was not built on money or size, but on intellect. Bill Jenkins had proved that you did not need the biggest engine to dominate the track. All you needed was the courage to challenge the system and the genius to hide your rebellion right in front of their eyes. Pomona, California, 1972. The air trembled as Bill Jenkins rolled his small green Chevrolet Vega to inspection. Officials leaned in, confused by what they saw. NHRA official: "This isn't a stock car." Jenkins: "It's legal enough to win." Moments later, the verdict came: disqualified. But while others packed up, Jenkins headed straight to the hooker header's shop. All night sparks flew, metal screamed, and the illegal Vega was reborn. At sunrise he returned, calm and fearless. The new headers passed inspection. On race day, the little Vega unleashed chaos, 9.6 seconds at 145 miles per hour, humiliating every Hemi on the track. The crowd erupted. The man they tried to stop had just rewritten history. When the dust settled at Pomona, it was clear that drag racing would never be the same again. Bill Jenkins' tiny Chevrolet Vega had done more than win a championship. It had exposed the weaknesses of an entire system. The National Hot Rod Association had tried to control the game with its rulebook, but Jenkins had played the game so perfectly that the rules themselves looked foolish. His illegal car had not broken the laws of racing. It had simply proven how outdated they were. In the weeks that followed, the racing world could not stop talking about what had happened. Some called Jenkins a cheater, others called him a visionary. Magazines printed photos of the Vega, under headlines like "Brains Beat Brawn" and "The Car That Outsmarted the Rulebook." In garages across America, mechanics began rethinking everything they knew about engine design and car balance. If Jenkins could build a small engine that outran the mighty 426 Hemi, then maybe the future was not about size at all. Maybe it was about precision. As the 1970s continued, the impact of that one car began to ripple through every corner of motorsport. Within just a few years, The same innovations that had gotten Jenkins disqualified were suddenly appearing in other race cars, and this time, they were legal. Tube frame construction, once considered fraudulent, became standard practice. The National Hot Rod Association eventually rewrote its own regulations to allow fully fabricated chassis. What had once been forbidden was now required. Jenkins' use of a dry sump oiling system, a feature unheard of in pro stock at the time, also became a key part of modern drag racing. His obsession with weight distribution, aerodynamics, and high compression efficiency transformed the way engineers approached competition cars. Even his controversial angled cylinder heads, which many officials once called impossible, were adopted by major manufacturers within a few years. Every racer who lined up at the starting line after 1972 was, knowingly or not, driving in the shadow of Grumpy's toy. The irony was beautiful. The same organization that once tried to ban Jenkins' car eventually embraced everything it represented. The lie that he told, the idea that his Vega was a stock car, became the foundation of modern pro-stock design. The National Hot Rod Association had tried to stop evolution, but evolution found its way through one man's determination and genius. Jenkins had forced them to evolve, not through rebellion alone, but through undeniable success. By the time Jenkins retired from professional racing, his name had become legend. He won 6 out of 7 national events in 1972 alone, an 86% win rate that few racers have ever matched. His later creations, like Grumpy's Toy 11, carried even more advanced technology, dry sump systems, full tube frames, and suspension geometry taken from road racing. What started as a small experiment in a Pennsylvania garage had grown into the blueprint for an entire generation of performance cars. When Bill Jenkins passed away in 2012, he left behind more than trophies and records. He left a legacy of curiosity, a reminder that true innovation often begins with a question no one dares to ask. He did not see rules as limits, he saw them as challenges waiting to be redefined. Every racer who pushes boundaries today owes a small debt to the man who once hid a revolution under the skin of a humble Chevrolet Vega. And that brings us back to the heart of this story, the lie. Bill Jenkins lied about his Vega. He said it was stock when it was not. He said it followed the rules when it clearly bent them. But that lie changed racing forever. It proved that progress is not born from obedience, but from courage. The courage to imagine something different, and to build it even when the world says you cannot. Bill Jenkins lied about his Vega, but that lie changed racing forever. Want to see the story of the car that even Jenkins feared? Click here for our next video.